I get asked all the time, are we still early to Bitcoin? Is it too late to buy Bitcoin? What's Bitcoin's future price going to be? Yada, yada, yada. So in this video today, I want to answer that question, which is how absurdly early it is. I have some numbers and some human psychology, both the very good examples of each to show you how early you are to Bitcoin, why it's early to Bitcoin, and why adoption is going to be very slow and then very sudden. So let's get right to it here. This chart, or not chart, these tables here, this is the US debt clock. Now, obviously, there are hundreds of other nations besides the United States, but America rules the world when it comes to bonds and it comes to our debt markets. So up here at the left, we have the US national debt. For reference, I'm recording this video on September 21st of 2023. America's national debt is $33 trillion. $1 trillion of that we've added in the last month, 2 months, something like that or so. That's $98,000 of debt per citizen. And per taxpayer, that's $254,000. Yes, that's $250,000 per taxpayer. If you pay taxes at all last year, you owe $250,000 of the US debt. Now, we all know how people are crippled by their credit cards, crippled by their mortgage and their mortgage payments, by their student loans, their car payments, $250,000. Okay. If you want to lend your neighbor, a random neighbor, you don't get to pick which neighbor, you get to lend one of your neighbors that paid taxes last year, $250,000. Would you do it? I wouldn't buy that debt. So that's just something to keep in mind here as a side note. But the larger point being here is that this is a number that's growing very quickly here. Federal spending is over $6 trillion and our federal deficit is $1.7 trillion. Now, down here, a little less flashy because it's not changing currently, but the federal debt to GDP ratio, in 1960 it was 52%, in 1980 it was 34%, it was back up to the mid-50s in 2000, and right now it's at 122%. Now, before we move on, it's as a side note, it's worth saying that 98% of the nations that hit 130% debt to GDP or sovereign debt to GDP level either result in hyperinflation, war, or default within 15 years. Now, the United States hit this level 3 years ago before the recording of this video in 2020. Okay, so again, 98% of nations that hit 130% end in hyperinflation, war, or default within 15 years, and we hit that 3 years ago. That's worthy of emphasizing here. Now, thankfully, that has come down. That has come down 8% to 122%. Actually, we were a little higher. I think we were at 136% in 2020. So we've come down almost 10% actually to 122%. Now that's good, but it's worthy to keep in mind we are not currently in a recession at the time of recording this video. And additionally, we are not in wartime, we are in peacetime. And so it's worthy considering. We hit 136% during the pandemic in 2020, which is a major threshold, again, historically speaking. We're in peacetime, we're not in wartime, our demographics are aging, our entitlements are about to explode, and Europe and China, Japan, the rest of the world look significantly worse than these numbers do here for the United States. That's something really to keep in mind here. There is nothing optimistic about this table here. And really, if you look at this whole outline of tables and numbers, very, very few things here are extremely optimistic. But I want to bring your attention to the bottom right here of U.S. unfunded liabilities. See, here is the current live count, again, September 21st, 2023. U.S. unfunded liabilities are $193.982 trillion. Now, this tweet I made 3 days ago, and you'll notice it's 193,911 in unfunded liabilities. So yes, for those of you doing the math at home, we've added over 75 billion, excuse me, I'm getting my series of zeros messed up. $75 billion we have added in the last 3 days since this tweet here. So this tweet is already outdated. It'll be more outdated by the time you watch this and significantly more outdated in the future. But what is the main point I'm making about this tweet here? The main point is that the unfunded liabilities of the United States are completely unsustainable. And if instead we were having the rate of this number going up, the rate of this 193 trillion going up, obviously this is more of a thought experiment than literally possible. But if that was instead cash that was chasing Bitcoin, just for context, that would mean that the US dollar price of Bitcoin, the US exchange rate for Bitcoin, would be rising, $7.50 every single minute forever. Now, that's actually really conservative because the way that these unfunded liabilities, entitlements, and interest payments balloon is that they're on an exponential curve. So that'd be $7.50 today, and inherently would have to be more in the future. But at today's current rates here in September 2021, we would be looking at a $7.50 increase every single minute at minimum indefinitely if the expanding of these unfunded liabilities are going directly into Bitcoin. That does not include the unfunded liabilities of every other nation on Earth. That does not include the assets across the planet, and that does not include the unfunded liabilities you currently see here. That's just the current expansion of unfunded liabilities in the United States. For context, again, humans are bad at math. $7.50 every minute. What would that look like? That would be just under $4 million per Bitcoin within a year. Now, am I predicting $4 million Bitcoin 2024? No, and some of my haters thought I was. That's clearly not the point of this tweet. The point of this tweet is that if unfunded liabilities are growing at that pace, and that was instead capital that was chasing the remaining number of Bitcoin, Bitcoin would easily be $4 million within a year. Now, again, we have to keep in mind, this is not including the rest of the world. All the real estate, all the stocks, all the gold, all the fine art, everything in the world that is not these unfunded liabilities, we're not including that. We're not including the unfunded liabilities of all the other nations of the world. We're not including the unfunded liabilities of the future or the past, just the increasing rate of tens of billions of dollars unfunded liabilities a day. Again, keep in mind, that's not just the current rate. We have to keep in mind these things grow exponentially in an exponential function here. Let's get a little bit of a picture of what would that look like. On this website here, we can do a little time machine and look at current rates. Where will we be in 4 years? 2027 is only 4 years away. That's only one presidential election cycle away. Now, obviously, this is extremely speculative. There could be wars, there could be recessions, there could be new entitlement programs, there could be all sorts of things that could balloon this number upwards. It's very improbable, in my opinion, that we could balloon it downwards, and I think most of you watching would probably agree with that, even if you're not a hardcore Bitcoiner. Government tends to spend more, not less. But again, taking conservative on current trajectory, where are we looking at one presidential cycle away from today here in 2027? We would be looking at a national debt of 44.9, so just under $45 trillion national debt. Now, instead of $250,000 per taxpayer, we're looking at $350,000 per taxpayer. And we'd be looking at a debt to GDP ratio of 150%. And again, it's worth reemphasizing 98% of nations and empires and nation states that hit a 130% debt to GDP level, sovereign debt, hit hyperinflation, default, or war within 15 years. And the 2% exception is just that it takes longer than 15 years. And in one presidential cycle, 4 years from today, in late 2023, the making of this video, we are looking at 150%, and we already hit over 130% 3 years ago in 2020. I mean, like, sometimes people call me a fearmonger or call me paranoid. I don't think I'm paranoid. I just read a history book. And a lot of people don't like to read history. They don't like to learn from history. And when they do, they don't want to admit there's a problem. Well, the numbers don't lie. There is a significant problem. In terms of per taxpayer, there's a problem. In terms of nationally, there's a problem. And in terms of debt to GDP, there's a problem. But again, let's go down here. We are no longer looking at $193 trillion of unfunded liabilities. We are looking at $257 trillion unfunded liabilities. I often joke online that pretty soon we're going to have to start talking in terms of quadrillions. Here's a real example of that. In 4 years, we will have $1/4 of $1 quadrillion in unfunded liabilities here in the United States. And keep in mind, this is at current rates. If we have a war, if we have a recession, if we need more bailouts, if we need more stimulus, if we have another pandemic or lockdown or climate catastrophe or whatever, any of those scenarios, our answer to that will be to print money. And so this will be dwarfed by whatever comes then. So with that said, whatever the numbers are, because I can't predict those numbers and neither can you, let's go to, again, the main point of the tweet here, over to the next slide. Come on. My computer is acting slow. Too many numbers for it to process. Yeah, so another thing to keep in mind too is not just that this grows exponentially to numbers significantly higher than the numbers you see on the screen here, but Bitcoin supply shrinks exponentially. Right now, there's about 4 million Bitcoin either to be mined or still sitting on exchanges, but that will shrink exponentially as more and more people like myself or like Michael Saylor or many other people out there buying thousands of coins, hundreds of coins, tenths of coins, hundredths of coins. All these people are buying Bitcoin, they're taking it off exchanges, and they're holding it for the future because they know that these numbers, these political currency units, these US political currency units will just continue to rise forever. And the exchange rate of Bitcoin in terms of these political currency units will just continue to go forever because it's unpredictable. It's unpredictable, but you know which way the trajectory is going. And so they're not going to be selling their Bitcoin. I'm not going to be selling you my Bitcoin. And so because we know that with very high confidence, we can make the rational assumption that the available supply of Bitcoin on the market is going to shrink exponentially, not in a linear fashion, but in an exponential fashion. Perhaps it'll regress, perhaps it will accelerate in a hyperbolic fashion. That is speculation that remains to be seen. But one way or another, we don't know what the total supply of U.S. political currency units will be, number one. And number two, we don't know how many Bitcoin will be available on the market, but we do know the direction of both these things. Okay, and Bitcoin is indeed repricing the entire system. There is no fiat price justifiable. Now, I promised that I'd be talking about how early are we. I've been talking mostly about the problem of U.S. debt. Now, are people going to realize this really quickly? Once you see these things, once you see these numbers and you hear these ideas, you think, oh my goodness, I got to buy Bitcoin right now because people are about to figure this out. This is about to get really crazy, really absurd, really quickly. Oh my goodness, everyone's going to smash buy Bitcoin or whatever price because they too understand there is no logical fiat exchange rate for price. And actually, that's not what's going to happen. See, people take a very long time to learn, and take a very long time to change their mindset. And my argument would be that adoption is going to take a long time. So not only are you early in terms of the fiat exchange rate for Bitcoin, $30,000, which is the price of Bitcoin. Actually, it's $27,000 right now. So it's extremely cheap in terms of US dollars, but it's not only early in terms of that, it's very early in terms of adoption. See, I also put this tweet out here a couple days ago, talking it just as a fun, amusing thought experiment and inspiration of the other tweets and numbers we're looking at here. My joke was that in the year 2031, what if we had $72 trillion in US debt, which is not a prediction, but it's probably more right than wrong. $72 trillion here. Again, we're at about $30 trillion today. In 4 years, in 2027, would be about $45 trillion. So I think it's pretty conservative, or in fact, realistic to say that the debt of the United States will be about $72 trillion by the year 2031, which is 4 years after 2027. And then I, again, speculate as a joke, what if the USD price of Bitcoin is just under $1 million, 985,000, it's just a specific number just for giggles. And then my joke is, what if the vast majority of people, in this case, 93% of people, say, why would I own Bitcoin when I could just use dollars? My point there being that even if this Ponzi scheme continues to go on indefinitely, even if we just print more and more and more dollars, we just have more and more political misinformation, we just have a lower and lower and lower amount of remaining trust in the US dollars, people still, 90, 80, 85, 95% of people will still prefer the US dollar because they don't want to accept the uncomfortable reality that they have been buying into a lie, that they've been denominating their hours of their life in terms of a lie. People don't want to believe that. They'd rather believe the delusion. They'd rather go along with the delusion. The house prices can go up forever, that the 401k can go up forever, and that inflation is good just as long as we keep it to 2%. People want to believe that because that's what we've been taught for decades, and it's what we've assumed for decades. And respectfully, I understand why we assume that. I assumed that too at one point. I've since learned to unassume that, but we don't want to accept that. And I just had to share, I'm not making fun of this person. I'm not making fun of this person. Okay, this person, I'm not trying to make this person look like a clown or a joke. I think their opinions speak enough of themselves as a clown and a joke. But we have this friend here that, in replying to my comment yesterday, which did very well, got a few hundred likes or whatever. Anyway, he comments that the value of $1 USD a year from now, more than 95 cents. The value of one Bitcoin, poop emoji, a year from now. Who the heck knows? It all depends on how many suckers promoters can draw into this Ponzi. I assume he's talking about me there being a quote unquote promoter of a quote unquote Ponzi, but okay, there, buddy. And so I commented, and I'm sharing this here with you now, again, not to make fun of this person specifically, even though he has a laser going right into his nose. I am just commenting that he is proving my point exactly. So I really appreciate his contribution to emphasizing this point, that even in the early 2030s, and maybe even in the mid to late 2030s, when the US debt is hitting 70 trillion, 80 trillion, $100 trillion, when the unfunded liabilities of the United States make less sense to price in terms of hundreds of trillions, and now begin to make more sense pricing in terms of single-digit quadrillions, even then, people will still not understand Bitcoin. They will still hold on to their dollars. They will still hold on to their inferior assets because they would like to believe the lie that the ship they are standing on that is sinking at a faster and faster exponential rate is not going to sink, and not even God can sink this ship. We like to believe that. It's human nature. We don't want to change. The pain of changing is very uncomfortable. And so we'd rather deal with the discomfort of inflation today and being stolen from today in our currency units because we don't want to accept that we might have been wrong this whole time. This is why I say that the majority of people will learn about Bitcoin through pain. most people adopting Bitcoin right now are not here in the United States. I'm sure that this fellow gentleman here, I don't know too much about him, but I'm sure he's from the United States or from Europe. The majority of us rich, fat, spoiled Americans here in the United States, or Europeans or Australians, whatever, the majority of us that have the privilege and the pleasure of being in a Western nation don't have to deal with the reality of 50% or 100% inflation. You look at Argentina or Sri Lanka or Lebanon or Turkey or Syria or wherever, these places don't have that luxury. And that's why they're adopting Bitcoin much faster on a per capita basis than we are here in the West. It's because our pain threshold for being willing to learn about Bitcoin and retrain or rewire our brains is not yet higher than the pain of inflation, because the pain of inflation is only 2% a year, only 2% a year. Right now, it's a little higher, 3, 4, 5, 6% whenever you're watching this. But the pain of learning about Bitcoin, it's not had that dynamic shift yet. And so, just again, going back to this tweet as a hypothetical example, you are so early to Bitcoin that we are still probably years away, again, years away from people that have not met this pain tolerance, this pain threshold, to beginning to go down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, to beginning to learn about Bitcoin. We could easily be looking in the 2030s. The US debt could still possibly, not guaranteed, but possibly be under $100 trillion. We still possibly, not guaranteed, but possibly could be looking at a Bitcoin with a US dollar exchange rate under $1 million. And we still very well might have over 90% of the general population completely ignoring, laughing at, or not paying attention to Bitcoin because they want to stay in the worldview and the paradigm that they've grown up in. And that's not to say I'm better than them or smarter than them. It's just to say that for whatever reason, I happen to be here and I happen to have figured it out before 99% of people. Most of you watching have probably figured it out before 97% of people or more than, or whatever. The larger point is that I have no idea how early we are to Bitcoin. But I do know that these, I'm sure, wonderful people online on Twitter and mainstream news or whatever that happen to say dumb things at times, or perhaps oftentimes in some cases, we're so early that they aren't even aware how nonsensical their opinions are here. And so over to the right on my commentary of this little exchange, I give an open invitation for anyone to tell me exactly how many US political currency units there will be in the year 2031. And I do that, and I offer to pay them in their currency of choice, whichever currency they happen to prefer, because I can't tell you how many dollars there will be. I can show you these little predictions of 4 years from now, and maybe it'll be this amount, maybe more, maybe less. But ultimately, I have no idea. I don't know, because I'm not predicting math. I'm predicting human emotion. You aren't trying to predict and project what the federal debt of the United States is going to be. You're trying to project what are the masses going to do? Who are they going to vote for? What politicians are they going to vote for? What entitlement programs are they going to vote for? Are we going to descend into war? Are we demand more spending? What's the Federal Reserve Chair going to do? What's the Treasury Secretary going to do? You're not predicting math. You're not predicting reason. You're predicting a random supply of political currency notes issued and decreed by the politicians and bureaucrats that issue these currencies, that are elected into that position, either directly or indirectly through lobbyists, by the general public and the general population. Okay. The reason you cannot tell me exactly what the debt of the United States will be in the year 2031 or even next year, the reason you can't do that is not because you don't have some insider information. Nobody knows, not even the insiders know. Okay, this 72 trillion number is a complete guess. Who on earth knows? Nobody knows. Not even this gentleman here with the laser eye nose. Nobody knows what the exact supply of US dollars is going to be, but we can say with extremely high confidence what the exact number of Bitcoins will be, the exact number of Satoshis will be. Okay. Now, with that said, even though we know the exact supply of Bitcoin at any determinate point in the future, it's impossible to know the value of Bitcoin at any point in the future because it's a free market. Again, if you're going to try to predict Bitcoin in terms of the US dollar, you're predicting human emotion. You're predicting, what's a Bitcoin advocate like Luke going to say on Twitter today, or what's a Bitcoin hater like this George guy with his lasers? What are they going to say? You're predicting opinions. What is the free market projecting the value of Bitcoin is today in terms of a political currency unit? That's an inaccurate measure of value. It's like if you're trying to predict the Bitcoin price in terms of dollars, you're having a double oversight here. You're making the oversight that it's simply human emotion that's projecting emotion onto this currency, and you're also looking through a currency that is fundamentally supplied and valued based upon human emotion. So you're trying to project two different things and it's just It's nonsensical. Don't try to project what the value of Bitcoin is going to be in the future. Don't trade Bitcoin. You will get wrecked. Because again, just like how we can't predict the number of US dollars in existence, we cannot predict what human emotion and reaction and response to Bitcoin is going to be in the future. So it is impossible to know the value of Bitcoin next year because it is a free market and it relies on emotion, and free markets are emotional. Compare that to the dollar. It is impossible to know the value of the US dollar because the supply is expanding forever. It has to expand forever. If it does not expand forever, you have deflation, and the credit system cannot allow deflation. It will do everything it possibly can to fight deflation, to fight collapsing yields. It will do everything to fight those interest rates rising. It will do everything to delay the insolvency, make it appear that there is no insolvency as long as possible. And it will result in revolution. It will result in war. It will result in political turmoil, misinformation, and riots. It will result in these things because it has to. Because it has to. It has to have the lie grow. It has to have the lie expand. And as soon as the lie contracts, everyone becomes incentivized to band hands together and say, let's keep it going. Let's keep the addiction going until we have an overdose, because the withdrawal pains are too great for us to bear, and we don't want to deal with it. And if we do want to deal with it, let's just deal with it next election cycle. So it is impossible to predict what the value of Bitcoin is going to be next year. It's impossible to predict what the value of the US dollar is going to be next year. This gentleman here seems to make the assumption that the US dollar with 100% certainty is going to be valued more than 95 cents on the dollar today. I think this is wrong. I don't think you can make that assumption rationally. Again, people can have their own opinions, but this gentleman here has multiple statements that are simply not rational. You cannot know with 100% certainty that the dollar is only going to lose 5% of its value the next year. You don't know that with 100% of certainty. And the evidence we have for that are the hundreds of currencies before the US dollar that have failed, the multiple reserve currencies we've had in the United States before the US dollar. We had two central banks before the Federal Reserve. We've had multiple hyperinflationary events here within the United States. If you ignore the strict 50% line, you fluctuate a little bit to continentals and Confederate dollars. We've had multiple hyperinflationary events here in the United States. We've had multiple monetary standards here in the last century. We had pre-Federal Reserve in 1914, we had pre-Bretton Woods Agreement in 1944, and we had pre-default on the gold standard in 1971, and now we're in post-1971 default on the gold standard. We've had multiple monetary errors here in the United States. And so you cannot, with a rational face, tell me that we know with 100% certainty that the dollar is only going to lose 5% of its value in the next year, especially considering, again, that 98% of the nations that hit 130% debt to GDP, sovereign debt to GDP, result in hyperinflation, default, or war within 15 years, okay? You are ignoring history if you think it's 100% certain that we will have only 5% debasement on the dollar. It is inexcusable, okay? You can have your opinions on the dollar. You can think the dollar is the best fiat currency, and in fact, I think it's the best fiat currency. You can have whatever opinion you want, but there are certain opinions that are not respectable. And with all due respect to this individual and the millions of others of individuals that happen to agree with this person, no disrespect to you on a personal level, but this statement, this worldview, is simply not backed up by any mathematics, any rationality, or any historical evidence. You cannot assume that the dollar is going to retain its value with that level of certainty that he's assuming here. So that's the first problem. And then the second problem is that he throws out this P word here, Ponzi, okay? Look, you can disagree with me about Bitcoin. You can say, I'm an idiot 24-year-old just sitting here on the internet, shouting and pounding his fists on Bitcoin, trying to convince people to buy Bitcoin. You can call me a shill, you can call me a grifter or a scammer or whatever, a promoter of a Ponzi, as gentleman does here. Look, you can call me whatever you want, and most of those opinions are respectable. You can be concerned about Bitcoin being banned by the government. I don't think the evidence supports that concern, but that's a respectable concern. You can think that perhaps we find a way to make a better Bitcoin than Bitcoin itself, okay? I don't think the evidence and reason aligns with that worldview, but that's a respectable opinion. You can make the case here or the case here. You can say that Lightning may not be able to scale, or what if Michael Saylor's coins are 6102 or whatever. You can make all these claims. And even though I don't think the evidence aligns in your favor, they're respectable claims. But there are certain claims that are factually, in objectivity, untrue, that are unreasonable claims. And one of those claims is that Bitcoin is a Ponzi. Okay, here I have a water bottle, okay, a water where I keep my water in. Are water bottles a Ponzi scheme? Okay, I'm recording this on a computer. Are computers a Ponzi scheme? Okay, what about gold bars? Are gold bars a Ponzi scheme? No. It is entirely reasonable and respectable to say that it's not a good idea to trade water bottles or baseball cards or whatever whatever commodities or gold or silver or copper. It's entirely respectable opinion to say, I don't think this has value and I don't buy it. I don't think other people should buy it. That's respectable. Okay. You can have that opinion. We can disagree and be rational. But as soon as you just go out there and make this irrational claim that a commodity has that a commodity is a Ponzi, it's like, okay, where's the yield on your baseball cards? Where's the yield on your hard drives? Where's the yield on your headphones? Like, they're just things that sit there. They aren't securities. They aren't financial products. They don't promise you any yield or promise you any returns. They just sit there and do nothing. That's the whole point. And that's precisely what Bitcoin does. It just sits there and it does nothing. It's not a financial instrument. You get no yield. There is no income. There is no promise of return of investment. Bitcoin inherently cannot be a Ponzi scheme. You can call it a scam, and that's respectable. You can call it dumb, and that's respectable. You can say, oh, maybe it's great and something in the future will come along. Okay, you can hate Bitcoin, and that's respectable. Like, I strongly disagree, but that's okay. You can be in your delusion, but you cannot rationally look at this and say it's a Ponzi. There are no yields. So anyway, my rambling point here is that we are very early to Bitcoin. If you're pricing Bitcoin in terms of US dollars, Bitcoin could easily go to millions of dollars, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, and eventually probably infinity in terms of US political currency units, because the US dollar has to debase to infinity in order to preserve credit markets and delay the revolution, delay the riots, and delay the violence. So you're very early in terms of that sense, and you're very early in terms of people's understanding of adoption. People will go out there and say things that are not just not backed by evidence, but things that are completely out of thin air and completely unreasonable arguments about Bitcoin. Even though, again, ironically, I'll pull this up one more time, the whole point of the tweet was that exact statement about how even nearly a decade from today, when Bitcoin has gone up dramatically higher, when the US dollar has eroded much more trust than it's already eroded the last couple of years, there will still be people that will be staring truth in the face and will still say things so objectively wrong and completely absurd. So anyway, I just want to, thanks to him and everyone else out there that's doing the good work, and I empathize with them. For full disclosure, I once thought Bitcoin was a scam. I once thought worst case scenario it's a Ponzi, best case scenario it's a scam. But I could tell pretty quickly, years before I bought Bitcoin, I could tell it was not a Ponzi. Like, I thought it was a scam, some trading tulip bubble, but those things are scams. Not everything's a Ponzi. Ponzi is a very specific definition. So anyway, I didn't understand Bitcoin. I thought it was a scam. I hadn't put in the work because my pain threshold was not at the point that I realized I had to learn about it, until with empathy, I placed myself in other people's shoes and I realized, wow, if inflation is not 2% a year, but instead 20% a year or 50% a year or 80% a year, all of a sudden Bitcoin and its price volatility in terms of those political currency units suddenly becomes very attractive. And ultimately, you're very early to Bitcoin. Fundamentally, because we have to print currency forever, and fundamentally, because humans are extremely emotional, and we will not learn about Bitcoin willingly, or at least the vast majority of us. The vast majority of us instead learn about Bitcoin through pain, unfortunately. So if you're watching this and you're buying Bitcoin, and you're buying Bitcoin via your political currency unit, congratulations, you're very early. Be patient. This will take a very long time. Do not trade. Take self-custody. It's that simple.